This podcast is dedicated to your personal and spiritual growth. The Pamela Cummins Show will take you on a journey to enhance yourself, relationships with others, your dream interpretation skills, your love life, intuitive abilities, and so much more. Are you ready to begin? And hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for stopping by the Pamela Cummins Show. We have a very exciting show today on mediumship to help you get in touch with your loved ones who have crossed over. And I have a special guest, Jacqueline Lunger. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. And with Jacqueline, I actually know Jacqueline from, she lived in my area around Jacksonville, North Carolina, and we were friends and we used to meet for lunch. And she has moved to Virginia and she does in-person events there, and you can connect with her more there and she can tell you about that. But let me introduce her. Jacqueline Lunger is available for personal and group appointments. She is a seer, intuitive artist, psychic medium, and ordained minister. Jacqueline is the author of 2 nonfiction books. The first one is There's DNA to Prove It, Messages from Beyond. And the second one is Commander Collins Wills. She offers her spirit-inspired self-help tools with her Inner Voices chakra guidance cards and speak stones for your growth and exploration. You can connect with her at this website, and it should also be on the front of the show information, but it's www.psychicauthor.com. I'll spell that PSYCHICAUTHOR, psychicauthor.com. And without further ado, welcome to the podcast, Jacqueline. I'm so happy you're here.
Thank you, Pamela. I'm delighted to be here today, and it's always good to hear your voice. I have missed you.
I've missed you too. Now you live in, is it Danville?
Danville. Danville.
Okay. And you do in-person readings there? And
I do some in-person work. I do some online work. I do a lot of telephone work. I'm getting ready to start 2 classes here in Virginia that will be in person. They're basic development classes. You know, spiritualists are big on sitting together and developing energy and supporting one another as we learn to understand energy, reading as energy, understanding symbols. And it will be a basic 6-week introductory class. It's going to meet on Tuesday nights in Roanoke, Virginia, for 6 weeks. And then I'm also starting one here in Danville. We haven't picked which night it's going to be, but it will be the same class 6 weeks in a row. And we've had an interest from some folks at a distance to be able to come in and participate in the class over the computer. So I'm looking at what the options are for that. And I think it's going to be a very ongoing class from the information that it's coming to me about it. There's been a real need here for someone who was interested in teaching psychic development, spiritualist mediumship, hands-on healing. There is a large practitioner base of healers of all different modalities in this part of the state, but there aren't a lot of readers. So I feel I'm here to fulfill a need. And while I'm here, because who knows how long I'll be here, I want to train good readers if I can. Okay. So I have people who are signing up for the class because they want to learn the skills for their own growth and development. And then I have some people who are already working in the healing field who would like to learn more about interpreting energy and giving a message in conjunction with their healing work. And then I have some people who just feel that they are destined to be mediums and they want to learn good quality mediumship with a strong ethical component to that. Because, you know, when you work in a non-traditional field, you kind of have to make up the rules as you go along, because some of them have just spontaneously opened up and started working without a lot of understanding about the ethics that go along with what they're doing. So I feel that that's something I am uniquely able to bring to students and seekers alike.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right. Well, just in case anyone's listening, because I never know who's listening, where they're at in their spiritual and personal growth development. Can you just explain what mediumship is?
Yes, be glad to. When someone is intuitive, they have activated their psychic senses, their clairvoyance, their clairaudience, their clairsentience, etc. And they are receiving information. Uh, they're receptive to it. They can actually learn to modulate their own energy to be more sensitive or less sensitive. And they're working of their own knowledge and ability, their own energy strengths when they're working psychically. A medium does all of that and raises their vibration to be able to receive information from the spirit world, from loved ones who have passed on that might have something of value to share. And so we're able to do both of those things simultaneously. You have to have the psychic development in order to do a good job with mediumship, because they are communicating with us mentally as well as energetically. When I can give you an example of the difference, an easy example.
Sure.
When I wrote my book, There's DNA to Prove It, that was an exact message from a young girl who had been murdered several years earlier. And her mother had been falsely convicted and imprisoned for killing her when she had no part in it, wasn't even in the house when it happened. But nonetheless, she was serving a prison sentence. And I spoke with the father, and he said, we've had a lot of psychics here over the years, and they all said she didn't do it. But you're the only one who brought up the DNA, and it was the DNA message that gave police something else to work with that led to her exoneration and the correct killer being caught. And I said, that's the difference between working psychically and working as a medium. I never would have gotten that message on my own, but because I was in communication with Crystal Lynn, the victim in this case, and I hate calling her a victim because she was so brave and so strong and so determined in seeing that this justice was corrected. It was her message that brought the DNA through. I wouldn't have been able to do that on my own. So that's a good example of the difference between working psychically and working mediumistically.
Okay. So I have another question for you, because, I know a lot of psychics, they talk to their guides and angels. Would you consider that mediumship? Talking to
No, to me it isn't. I know there are people who would argue that it is. We're going to speak with our guides because they're part of us. They're part of our soul team that incarnates with us when we come to this world. Speaking to them is something that never stopped. It can't start because it never stopped. We were communicating with them before we came into these bodies. We've communicated with them whether we were conscious of it or not the whole time we've been here. And we will continue to communicate with them when we're on the other side. So for me, that doesn't meet the mediumship definition.
Okay, so then I just want to be clear on your definition. Mediumship basically is when we talk to people who have lived with us during this incarnation and who
People
have
who
crossed
have
over.
been physical.
Okay.
Not necessarily with us in this lifetime, although many have. It could be someone who lived in our family before we were born.
Okay.
And for instance, I talked with a woman recently who said when she was a teenager, she was living with her parents in a southern state, and it was very hot. They didn't have air conditioning. She went in to take a nap and took all her clothes off because it was hot. She wanted to cool off. She said, I'm on my bed, I'm asleep. And all of a sudden, a man at my window wakes me up and says, get your clothes on. And she said it scared her so bad, she jumped into her clothes as fast as she could and just stayed in her room to see what was going to happen next. And a man came into the house, and she said if it hadn't been for the man at the window warning me and getting me up and dressed, I don't know what he might have done to me. But she said because I was alert and I was dressed, I was able to speak to him very authoritatively and order him out of the house, and he left. And she learned years later, looking at old family photos, that that was a grandfather who had passed 3 years before she was born.
Interesting.
Yeah. So often we don't know them from a personal lifetime, but they know us through the family ties.
All righty. So I know, can you tell the audience how long you've been doing mediumship, and also while you're explaining that, how does it work for you? Do you hear, feel, see them? Could you explain your experience?
Well, first of all, experience is 50% family, because my father's family came here as practicing spiritualists during World War I. They came from England, and they continued to practice their religion after they were here. So I had half the family demonstrating healthy spiritualist living to me. I had the other half of the family in more traditional religions, and then I had a babysitter who was in a completely different kind of religion. So right from the beginning of this lifetime, I had 3 different, very diverse religious practices and beliefs demonstrated for me, and they were all good. There wasn't a bad one, they were just different. So I had clairvoyant experiences very early in life of seeing a spirit man who lived in my grandmother's house. And it was the grandmother who wasn't a spiritualist, of course. And I would ask about him, and people would tell me I was imagining it. There was no one there. And I would say, yeah, there really is. I've seen him. I know where his room is. And she had closed off the upstairs of her house after her children grew up and left home. They had 2 bedrooms on the first floor. They didn't need that room anymore. And I would go up there, and there was a man who lived up there. He was a very nice man, very quiet man, never did anything disruptive, didn't make any trouble. But it bothered me that he lived up there all alone, and that no one cooked for him, and no one cleaned for him, and no one talked to him. And I remember thinking over the years after she sold the house, I wonder what happened to him. When my grandmother finally passed away, she was 99 years old and was actually buried on Halloween, because that's how it worked out. After her casket was in the ground, my mother told me who the man was. I had no idea. She said it was her father, a great-grandfather to me, who had taken his own life after he had buried his wife, who died of cancer, and he had cancer and was near the end of his life anyway, and he just decided to end it a little sooner in order to get away from the pain and be with her. And my grandmother was so ashamed of that, she would never allow it to be spoken of. In her lifetime, no one spoke of it at all. So that was confirming to me that what I was getting way back then was accurate. I've always had strong intuitive hunches, precognitive dreams, those kinds of things. I was the recreational fortune teller, for lack of a better way of talking about it, in my teenage years. In my 20s, I got a little wrapped up in family and being an adult and those challenging issues, and distanced myself somewhat from my spiritual studies and activities, because I just didn't have the time or the energy for it. But I promptly got back into it in my 30s. And that was brought on mostly by Commander Collins' will, the story that book talks about. Commander Collins was a good friend of the family. He passed away. He left a will and estate plan, very carefully crafted of what he wanted. And things went off track very soon after his passing. The people that he left in charge of decision making and money management started fighting amongst themselves, and they started mismanaging funds and properties. And he came to me asking for help. He didn't know who else to go to. Somebody help get this back on track, because a lot of money is being lost. And he had a young son that he intended to be the sole beneficiary, and all these supposedly good friends, trustworthy adults, were screwing it up. He reached out to the only person he knew to reach out to that might be able to help him. And he guided me through the course of that. It took a lot of different twists and turns, and took more than 3 years to finally bring to a close. But it was a successful venture, and I learned a lot. I learned more about trusting spirit than I had before. It greatly increased my ability to pay attention and trust that they knew more about what was going on than I did. And that's a hard thing to do when you're working with someone who's just beginning to develop, is to get them to trust what they're receiving could be correct, because nobody likes to be wrong.
Right. Okay, so since you brought it up, getting people to trust this, what types of people could have experiences with those who have passed on?
Absolutely everyone can. Everyone and anyone can. Young children spontaneously do it. And then they learn not to pay attention to it as they age, as they become more engrossed in what's going on in the world, and find that the people around them don't give this any credence. There's no encouragement or understanding. And a lot of times you will find people say, I used to do this all the time when I was young, but I was taught not to do it. I was taught not to talk about it. I was taught to ignore it, and even deny it in many cases. So they become conditioned away from it. Yet when something of a vital nature comes up in their life, it tends to return, and very strongly.
Yeah, it's usually a crisis, or
Yeah.
excuse me, or something comes up. Okay, so I agree. I mean, we all can connect, but a lot of people, as you say, kind of poo-poo it, like, oh, that really didn't happen. How do our deceased loved ones, or even deceased, people on the other side, how do they come to us? How can people know that this is really happening?
Well, often it will come with a memory. That will be the first introduction, a memory of something. You will smell something you associate with them, or you'll hear a song or a joke that you associate strongly with them. You will find your mind returning to that person, and not sure why, just enjoying those memories. Very often when you're remembering them, it's because they're nearby. I know one woman who is in a development class, and she says, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm so frustrated. Everybody talks about all this stuff they see. I don't see anything. I said, well, what do you get? What sensations or senses are operating for you? She said, I just smell. That's all. I only smell things. All the information I get comes from smell. And I said, then maybe that's enough.
Agreed.
We don't all have to be clairvoyant and clairaudient. But if you work with it over time, you will find more and more of your senses become engaged.
Because I know it happened for me. Mostly heard instead of smell. Occasionally I get smell, but I mostly heard and I felt. And it took years for that clairvoyance to come in. And this was like, right in the beginning of my personal and spiritual growth path. Must have been about 1992, 1993. My mom had just, it was before my mom passed away. So I'm sorry, it must have been like 1990, 1991. And I was sitting with a group of people, and somebody was talking, and I was very focused on what they were saying because it was really interesting. I have no idea what it was, but and I hadn't seen my mom for many years, and all of a sudden in my head I heard, "Call your mother." And I was like, "What?" And I looked to one side, and the woman didn't say anything. I looked to another side, and it was somebody I barely knew, and I was like, "Oh my God," and it freaked me out. But I ended up calling my mother, and that was like one of my really first strong connections with my guide to move forward. And then when my mother did cross, I used to smell her cigarettes and hear things. So I guess I'm saying that to people. So you're not Looney Toony, like as you said, it comes in memories, and everyone, it comes differently too. Okay.
Yes, I was about a month ago. I was just relaxing in the evening. I wasn't going to bed. I wasn't reading. I was just relaxing. And I had a strong memory of my high school boyfriend. And all of a sudden I saw him in the room with me, and he was just coming for a greeting. There was no message. It was simply a greeting, touching in because he could. And I got online and I checked, and sure enough, he had passed away 2 years ago. And I didn't know it. So it was nice that after all these years, he still remembered me fondly and reached out to me, and I was happy for that.
Okay. And that's a good point that you brought up because, as you know, Jacqueline, people always say, when, how long? And our time is different than those who've crossed over. And could that be the reason? I know the answer, but I'm going to ask you anyhow. Could that be the reason why some people will, see their departed loved ones right away, and then other people it takes longer? Or is it their denial?
I'm glad you asked me that because I've changed my mind about it recently.
Okay.
I used to believe, and it was pretty well traditional mediumship belief, that for at least 3 months you shouldn't try and contact anyone. They needed that time. That was minimum. They needed at least that much time to get into their new space and become accustomed to how life was where they were. Since my grandson was killed last summer, and he was with me 2 different times within the first 15 hours of his passing, he called on me. I've changed my mind about that because I've talked with other mediums who are saying the same thing I am. People are coming back much quicker. They're communicating much sooner than they used to. And it's not just our loved ones, it's clients' loved ones too are coming sooner. I had a woman sit with me in June, and I gave her a message from someone who was recently departed. She said, "Oh, I didn't think they could come that quick. She has only been gone 2 weeks." I said, "Well, she was here, very strongly here. Do you agree everything that I said from her was evidential?" And she said, "Absolutely. There's no doubt in my mind that was her. I just didn't know they could come that fast." So sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But I can tell you 10 years ago, I would read for someone who wanted to know about Aunt Grace, and I would find myself looking at Aunt Grace in a hospital bed in the spirit world, waiting for her to wake up because she was still sleeping and she still thought she needed that hospital bed. So I don't know that I'm seeing much of that anymore. I think the awareness on both sides of the veil has picked up immensely.
Agreed. I think just the timing is different. Okay, here's a question for you. When our loved ones cross over, humans cross over to the other side, how much time do they need to know that they're on the other side? And it kind of goes with the other question that I'm saying, but do some people need more time to readjust to their being, in heaven or whatever you want to call, where others are like, "Oh, this is the same old, same old"? I hope I'm making sense with this question.
Yeah, I understand your question. And I think it has to do with the amount of time that they had to prepare for their transition. If they had an illness that lasted a couple of months or a year or more, and they had time to prepare themselves and begin to look into their next space, because I know that we do that when we know what's going to happen next. We start peeking around the corner and looking through the window and getting a sense of where we're going and what it's going to be like. That's a very smooth, easy transition. In the case of my teenage grandson, who had no time to prepare at all, it was very sudden and unexpected. The first time he came to me, he just sat. He didn't talk. He was thinking. He was putting the pieces of what had happened together in his mind. And I knew not to interfere with that. I had a very strong sense of let him be, let him do this in his way. Don't touch him, don't love him, don't help him. Just let him be in a safe space, which is what he came to me for, was a safe space to process. There's a place in the Bible where Jesus's tomb has been opened, and the women go there, and they see his body is gone, and they weep, and they're very upset. And he comes to them in his light body, and he says, "Don't touch me, I'm not sealed yet." And I sensed that's what was going on with Joseph. He knew he wasn't in his physical lifetime anymore, but he wasn't fully into his spiritual lifetime yet either. So he just needed that time and space to understand what had happened, and he wasn't asking for help. He was figuring it out on his own. Now he left, and then about 2 hours later returned, and this time he knew I could see him, and he knew we could communicate mentally back and forth. And once he got that, he was so excited. He was so happy. He said, "Ah, sweet." And he just took off, just like he would have in his regular life, with me yelling after him, "But Joseph, not everyone is like me." Typical grandmother, But it was very uplifting and very reassuring to see him and know that he was okay and that he could come back if he wanted to.
Awesome. All right, so I have two more questions before we end this podcast. But the first one is, let's go with this one first, because I've had clients who were afraid of their mediumship ability or their psychic abilities because they were afraid an evil spirit was going to come around, or a ghost. So what can people do to protect themselves from bad juju, or ghost, or whatever you want to call them?
Right. I understand the question, and we deal with that quite a bit in this field at some point or another. I think everyone has to face their own education and questions and understanding and misunderstanding of what is evil, what is temptation, and how strong is it, and how strong are we. I always go back to the quote from St. Teresa, back in the witch burning days that she had to endure and live through. And she would say, "The devil will fear me." And that's where I think we have to be so strong in our own faith, in our own certainty that God is good and we're part of that goodness, and nothing permanently horrible could happen.
Okay. The other thing that I would like to say, in case somebody has fear about that, is all you have to do is ask for Archangel Michael or the angels or your ancestors, Jesus, whoever you like, to come and protect you, and they'll be there in a second if you're afraid of that.
True. Very true.
Yeah. Okay. And my last question to you is, because some people, and they say it to me, and I'm sure they say it to you, well, it's easy for you to do because you're a psychic, you're a medium, you can do this. How can I do this? So if somebody who really wants to connect to their loved one but doesn't know how to, what are some tips you can give them to connect with those who've crossed over?
Dreams are usually the easiest way. You set your intention that you would like to have communication with whoever it is, and you would like for this communication to be from a very high and holy source, and that you're most receptive to it in a dream state. And usually within 3 days that will happen.
Okay. Awesome. Any other tip?
Well, I believe in prayer. Not everyone does, but I do believe in prayer. And I believe when you pray for someone, it registers on them. And they know that you're holding a good thought for them and that you're reaching out in love. And they're very likely to reach back.
Right. Right. Okay. So let's say, and I know we both know this answer, but somebody's saying, okay, well, the dreams and the love, but is there any way that they can actually know that it was that?
Any way that what?
They can, like, okay, like they'll say, okay, I had a dream and I felt their love, but is there any way they can really know that it was their loved one who came to see them?
Well, I think that has a lot to do with their ability to have faith, their doubt, and what it takes for them to be convinced.
Okay.
I mean, we can be doubting Thomas and argue and argue and argue and argue. If we're of that mindset, we will never be convinced, and we will deny ourselves the love and harmony of having had a real spiritual experience.
Okay.
I find that people who have a genuine spiritual experience know it. They may try to explain it away with logic, with skepticism, but they know whether or not they've had the experience.
Thank you. Thank you. I was, I know that was a little bit of a tough question, but I don't know, maybe there's a listener out there who's going to poo-poo most of this, but I just felt like that question needed to be asked. So thank you for your answer.
Yes, yeah. and I'm happy to do that. I've dealt with a lot of skeptics over the years. I had a class going in Jacksonville years ago, and I had a woman who was very interested in doing fine. And about the third weekend, she said, I don't think I'm going to be able to keep coming. My husband is really having a hard time with this. He's afraid I'm getting into witchcraft. And no matter what I say to him, it doesn't make any difference. He's just afraid. And I said, well, get a babysitter and bring him to class with you. Let him see for himself what we do.
Mm.
He came to the rest of the classes. He loved it. He got into it. He was a scientist. He was some kind of an engineer, and his mind worked in very, linear patterns. But he could understand what we were doing, and he appreciated it.
Great. Thank you for that. All right. Well, we've come to the end of the time. And Jacqueline, if you could just remind people how to get in touch with you, that would be great.
Yes, thank you. You can reach out to me by email at Jackie, Jackie, Lunger, Lunger, all one word, at gmail.com. Or you can go to my website, www.psychicauthor.com. And I want to remind everyone that I do have the 6-week spiritual development circle starting next Tuesday in Roanoke, Virginia. It will go on for 6 consecutive Tuesdays. And we do have room for other people if you would like to come. And just to be clear with everyone, a spiritual development circle is a long-established method to activate one's inner senses, to learn about energy, to learn about grounding and clearing and healing. And each class will enhance your skills in sensing energy as information. We will have a topic of interest along with a guided meditation and a personal experience each week. And each person is able to develop at their own pace with group support and encouragement. Everyone is welcome. You don't have to be a believer to come to class and experience for yourself what's available.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I'm glad to have you here. And it's been very interesting. If anyone wants to get in touch with me, it's www.pamela CUMMINS.com. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Namaste. Until the next time. Bye-bye.
Namaste.